Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Southerner's Northern Garden. So I'm Matthew. If you're new to my channel, I garden in Southwest Ohio. I'm originally from Alabama, and this is my garden. We are in the middle of fall and we are quickly entering winter. So today what I'm going to be doing is my final round of planting. I have a few things to get in the ground. We have a harder freeze coming later this week sometime. It is currently Halloween, so happy Halloween, and it has rained almost every day for the past 5 to 6 days. So the ground is very, very wet, and this is going to be a very messy cleanup day. The yard looks pretty rough as well because there's been a lot of people walking around with it being so wet, changing the windows on our house. And it's just, my ground is heavy, heavy clay soil, and during the winter and fall and spring, when we're getting a lot of rain, it's almost impossible not to have muddy shoes when you go out into the yard. So I have picked up 15 bags of mulch, and that's what I'm going to use to wrap up my remaining mulching projects for the year. Those are almost exclusively going to go over perennials I planted. So I planted some bare root perennials a couple weeks ago, and I have a few more perennials that I need to get in the ground today, as well as just some small shrubs and one tree. So we're going to start this project by planting all of those things, and then I'm going to come through and do some perennial cutback and cleanup. We're going to mulch, and then I want to take you around and show you how I heel in what I'm not getting into the ground into my raised vegetable garden for the year. It's kind of an odd timing, so now I will be heeling things in. The leaves on the trees haven't completely fallen off yet, but usually when those leaves fall off, I do take those leaves and add them to my vegetable garden, and so it will surround some of those plants that I've heeled in, giving them a little further protection for winter. So the beginning of this video is essentially going to be me planting a lot of stuff. So let's get started, because it's kind of a gray day outside and I want to get as much done because I'm considering this my last big day in the garden. I still have some annuals that I will need to clean up from the front of the garden, including my geraniums. My petunias still look pretty good, the ferns, but those are small cleanup projects that I will simply just remove those and trash them after we do have our final hard freeze and they don't look so well. Right now they still look okay, although I didn't have the best petunia year. So the primary purpose of today is to get all of the dirty projects out of the way and wrap up mostly the backyard. The front yard will have a few things that need tidied up, like the annuals, but otherwise the front yard doesn't need a ton. There are hostas to clean up, which are primarily what I clean up in the fall. You don't typically want to leave hostas sitting around until spring because bugs can stay over in that gross foliage because they love that very decaying matter. So clean up your hostas. I will be cleaning up some of the perennials in the backyard, which I'll show you. There are not a lot of perennials that I leave standing in winter. That's simply because a lot of them become diseased at this point. So 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 is one I'll be removing in this video. Some people like to leave 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 because they have really interesting seed pods over winter. I think they look kind of messy, and actually mine have looked kind of messy for about a month, so I'm going to be cutting those off at the ground. My catmint needs to be trimmed up some, and the grasses will stay standing over winter. I will leave my echinacea standing over winter just for the birds and for some winter interest, but any type of hostas or perennials that have really weak stems or just bad looking foliage, I'm going to get those cleaned up because I don't want those sticking around for winter and keeping either disease in the garden or harboring over bad insects for next year. So let's get started. So my microphone is going to be off in most of this cleanup process, but I wanted to speak specifically about this redbud that I will be planting first. The other things I will be planting is a Japanese maple that I got from Mr. Maple, and some various other shrubs that I picked up throughout the year. I have a whole video on Mr. Maple that I posted about a month ago, 3 weeks to a month ago. I picked up this at a garden center just last week, or a week and a half ago, for $47, and that was a really nice steal at a closeout at the end of the gardening season. So during this cleanup, there will be no audio and no explanation. I like to do that in a lot of my videos, but today, because it's going to be so muddy, I don't want to have my camera equipment on me and potentially damage any of that. So if you have any questions about anything I do or any perennials I clean up, drop those in the comments below and I'll be happy to answer those, and then we can have a little discussion if you like in the comments. So I'm going to get started by planting this lavender twist redbud. It is a native and it does really well in our climate in Southwest Ohio in general. So this is a contorted redbud, and it also is a weeping redbud. So I'll try and find a photo and put that on the screen of what this might look like in the future. It's actually pretty nicely structured right now. There were two options at the garden center, and I picked the better of the two. And so this will form like a nice little structure here along this walkway that will eventually be stone that leads to the front of the house. It'll be surrounded by boxwoods on both sides, and then this section beside me here is what I'm going to be planning and dreaming about over winter. I do have something to plant here that I need to move from another part of the garden, something that I accidentally mislabeled earlier, or it lost its label earlier in the season, so I thought it was something else, and it ended up not being when I saw it bloom, and that is a viburnum called 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲. I picked this one up earlier in the season as a tiny plant, and I do not have any viburnums in my garden. I was kind of anti-viburnum for a while because when we began re-landscaping our house, we ripped out all the viburnums that were planted on the north side where I currently have my incredible hydrangea hedge. In that process of ripping those out, I discovered that I am highly allergic touch-wise to viburnum, and I broke out really bad simply removing those shrubs and having the leaves and branches kind of brush against my skin. So 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 is a beautiful viburnum, and I'm not sure where I may plant it. I may plant it further down towards the blueberries, kind of in the center, because I don't want it super close to this redbud right here, because I don't want it to compete. So there will probably be stuff here next year that I've got to think about and what I'll put there. There'll probably be a few more evergreens that I will tuck in. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 is a double file viburnum, which have these beautiful large blooms. They're similar to hydrangeas, so when you see me dig that up and move that over here, that is that specific plant as well. But I'm going to get started because I have a lot to do today, so follow along, and then at the end of this video you can see what I do to prepare my plants that I haven't been able to get in the ground for winter. All right, everyone, so I just wanted to talk about healing plants right quick before I finish cleaning up the areas. So I have these shrubs that I have nowhere to put this year, or I haven't thought of a location to put them, and I'm just generally running out of time, and so I'm going to think about where I put these next spring. So what I'm going to do in the meantime is these size shrubs were intended to be potted up when I got them over a month ago, and because I haven't found a place for them in the ground, I just have containers left over. Like this one was from, I'm not even sure, maybe the boxwoods that I repotted. I like to recycle my containers, as I mentioned. So I get a size that's slightly larger than the one it came in, and I actually just used my raised bed soil instead of putting potting soil in here, because I know this is organic and I don't have any organic potting soil left. And next year I will have to add some additional potting soil or raised bed mix anyway. So I dig out a hole and sink these containers in the ground, as you can see here. And then I just fill the hole up to the extent I can, drop the shrub down in there, and continue filling around it. So when this is done, it will be completely full and a full potted up plant. And I stack these really closely together in a line. And I've done this for the past 2 or 3 years in my garden, and I have not lost a plant yet. They do really well because we have wet winters. As a reminder, if you tend to live in a location that has dry winters, you may have to come out here and water your raised bed. That's not a concern for me. I've never came out here and watered my raised bed. I may water it in when I'm done, just so that it's moist, but after that, I don't touch it again until the next spring. What this does is give the root ball some insulation and allow it to put on some additional root growth for next spring, and just generally protects the plant. And so what I'll also do is when the leaves fall off my big tree in front, I will come in and put leaves all around these shrubs. And so they'll be protected a little bit all around the base of them. And it's just a general good method to use to winter over things. For other stuff, I put containers that are also really large, including 3-gallon containers in here before. These are daylilies that I dug up for the fence installation, and I haven't found a spot for them either. So what I'm gonna do is I'm not gonna plant them in their containers because daylilies are so hardy. I'm not necessarily concerned about the roots or anything. What I'm going to do is just pull them out of these containers because they're not rooted in anyway. They were just removed a few weeks ago, and plant them directly in the raised beds. I do have the labels next to the daylilies that I had in the garden that I put in the container, so I'm just gonna stick those right next to the daylilies. And then next spring, I will dig them out of the raised bed before I start planting stuff in the vegetable garden, and then they'll be good to go. So I'm gonna finish doing these, and you'll see what it looks like when I'm done. And that is pretty much it. There's not a whole lot to it. You want to come around and make sure the soil is up all the way to the top of the container. So I need to come in, and I may have to move a little from another part of the bed just because the soil has sunk a little bit since I filled it up in the spring. You also, in general, just want to be cognizant of the things you're doing this to. If you have a plant that is only hardy in your zone and above, then this may not be something you want to do. You may want to go ahead and get that into the ground. As a general rule, I tend to not purchase anything that isn't at least one zone hardier than my zone, because I don't want to put that in the garden, even though you're assigned a USDA zone. As a lot of people across the country learned this past winter, there were some really bad ice storms, especially around Oklahoma, and they actually got colder than their average zone. So a lot of people lost plants in that instance. And so I just always give me a little wiggle room as far as what I'm putting into my garden. If I really love something and it's only hardy in my zone and above, I will take the risk and plant it. But just know that if that happens and the plant's not protected enough and there's a really, really bad winter where the temperature drops below your hardiness zone, you could risk losing that plant. So all of these things are hardy below my zone, and we shouldn't have a problem with that. Also be cognizant of how wet your winters are and whether you'll need to water these in, since they're not directly in the ground, and they won't receive as much moisture and they'll dry out quicker as a result. Other than that, if you have plants that you haven't been able to get in the ground, or you have plants that you just don't know where you want to put them yet, heeling them into your raised garden bed is fine. If you don't have a raised garden bed, you can also do this in just the ground in your garden. If the plant is not where you want it to be, plant it in its container. It's still better off than sitting out exposed to the elements in its container. I wouldn't recommend bringing plants like this into a garage simply because there won't be enough moisture, and especially if they're evergreens, they still need light to photosynthesize because they have those leaves all winter. If you have a greenhouse, certainly put them in your greenhouse instead. I don't have a greenhouse. That's not an option for me. This is the next best thing and has worked really well for me for several years in a row. Hi everyone, so it's a couple days later. I actually went to edit my video last night and I realized that I had forgotten to turn on my audio apparently for the last segment of the videos I recorded on Sunday on Halloween. So all you have to know is That was the best advice I'd given all year, and it was the stuff Nobel Peace Prize speeches were made of. But in all reality, there wasn't a whole lot to it. I just went over the areas that I cleaned up. If you have any questions about what I did in the previous videos, let me know and I will explain that process to you. That's always been my nightmare, and it's something all YouTubers have to worry about. I'm really very diligent in checking that, and I thought I had checked it and I just didn't. So I guess I didn't turn the audio back on after I finished working out in the yard, and it happens. So if you have any questions, let me know. In a world full of hate, be a light. Take care, everyone, and talk to you soon. Bye.